제 전부도 님이죠. 돈은 뭐는 전부 나게도 나그러다 감산도 실물도 tumbato je janla ki shomsar ne chen ro zer ni jan gam sa ja wor tu ji shan ya la man ji me ban zo ja la so ra gong ge to ban bo ro shin ji lo gong ge to ban bo ro shin ji lo gong ge to ban bo ro shin ji lo.
Profound and subtle Dharma is rarely encountered in eons. Now we hear and follow it. May we realize the Tathagata's meaning. To liberate beings, please generate bodhicitta before teaching. Now we will continue with the Shurangama Sutra. In the Shurangama Sutra, we have already covered the previous sections. We have discussed the 10 aspects of revealing the nature of seeing. Among these, we covered that the nature of seeing is the mind, and that the nature of seeing does not move, the nature of seeing does not perish, and the nature of seeing is not lost. We have already completed these 4 topics. Now we are teaching about how the nature of seeing does not return. We are explaining this principle. Before we continue, let me mention something briefly. Today is World Book Day, or we can also call it World Reading Day. Regarding World Reading Day, there was a Spanish author in the past named Cervantes. He was very famous. He passed away on April 23rd, 1616. Coincidentally, Shakespeare also passed away on that same day. So people at that time commemorated the day these 2 great figures passed away. Also, in Spain, there is a rather special festival. It seems that there was a princess who was taken away by a poisonous serpent. Later, someone rescued her. After she was rescued, the woman gave him a book. This book represented a kind of courage and strength. Because of this meaningful connection, they celebrate this occasion. Every year on April 23rd, they celebrate this rather special festival. Later, they made a suggestion to have the United Nations establish World Book Day. It began in 1995 and has continued until now. At first, it was called World Book Day. Later, it became World Reading Day, when everyone reads books. I think for all of us who are here, basically, it is not just on World Reading Day. We should be reading every day, right? Whether it is reading the sutras or studying the 5 great treatises, except for the few who are doing meditation practice and those who are engaged in volunteering work. Everyone should be reading from morning until night. So we do not need to specifically celebrate this festival. However, this is a day that receives quite a bit of attention around the world. So I just wanted to remind everyone of this today. Now, we are teaching the Shurangama Sutra. In the Shurangama Sutra, as I just mentioned, we are now discussing how the nature of seeing does not return. This is the 5th topic among the 10. Previously, we discussed when the Buddha teaches the Dharma to Ananda and the other disciples, when he is giving teachings, if Ananda's mind is continuously focused on the subtle sound of the Buddha's voice, then actually this is not the nature of seeing. This is the conceptual mind. This is similar to when someone uses their finger to point at the moon. If they do not look at the moon and only look at the finger, then actually they have lost sight of the moon. At the same time, they have also misunderstood the purpose of the finger, because the finger itself is not the luminous body. But if they mistake the luminous body for the finger, this means they have already lost the true understanding of the finger as well. So we have discussed these various faults. In this way, when the Buddha gives teachings, if our mind is continuously focused on the sound of the Buddha's voice, of course, from the conventional perspective, listening attentively to the Dharma has merit. However, when we are teaching the Shurangama Sutra primarily emphasizes recognizing one's own luminous mind, or we can say the true mind, or we can say the fundamental original mind. If we want to recognize this, then our mind cannot actually be focused on this discriminating aspect. Therefore, this is not considered to be the true nature of seeing. Yesterday, we explained this principle in the previous section. Now, moving forward, we will once again look at the Shurangama Sutra. Actually, the Shurangama Sutra, when taught by someone like me, may not necessarily be very good. If it were taught by someone who is enlightened, perhaps every point would be perfectly explained and the path would be present everywhere. That would be truly meaningful. Otherwise, when we ordinary people use our discriminating minds to speculate or to conjecture and teach in this way, sometimes we might feel, The Buddha's sutras are inconceivable. The blessings are inconceivable. It is still very good that we study in this way. After the Buddha demonstrated his parinirvana, more than 2,500 years have passed. And today, we also have a group of people whose minds are continuously focused on the Buddha's spiritual journey. This is also a very beautiful kind of karmic connection. From another perspective, indeed, the Shurangama Sutra is an especially profound teaching. As everyone knows, how did the Shurangama Sutra come to this region? This history was already explained in the first couple of lessons when we began this teaching. At that time in India, this sutra was not allowed to leave the country. It was protected as a kind of national treasure. But later, through various causes and conditions, it came here and was propagated. Therefore, this scripture can truly be called a national treasure, a spiritual treasure. It is genuinely a spiritual wealth, a most supreme treasure. Therefore, for ordinary people like us, when we teach such profound principles, sometimes there are indeed certain aspects that may not be quite adequate. But no matter what, at this moment, it is like a blind person carrying a lamp. It would not work for a blind person to lead the way. However, if they are carrying a lamp, then many people can still rely on this condition to go through this path. This is also not without value. Therefore, I think we should continue to study the profound words of the Thus Come One. Today, another analogy is given. Yesterday, it was the analogy of the finger pointing at the bright moon. Today, there is another one. Previously, there was also a similar analogy. The analogy of the guest and the host. This analogy is also used here. This analogy is very important too. Throughout this entire topic, its extended meaning is always involved. For example, a traveler who stops at an inn may stay for a night. He then goes on his way. He does not live there all the time. Here, an analogy is also given. For example, there is a passing traveler. This traveler lodges at an inn. He lodges at a guest house. Nowadays, there are many different names for such places. Inns, hotels, guest houses, lodges, and also hostels. There are many different terms for these places. In the past, it was called a traveling pavilion. He lodges at this inn. He may stay for a night. He then goes on his way. He stays temporarily, and after a while, he has already departed. He does not live there all the time. It is impossible that a traveler, after all, he is a guest. As a guest, he cannot permanently reside there. So what does this represent? It represents our illusory mind. The illusory mind of us sentient beings is similar to a guest. It is temporary. Then there is also another one, unlike the innkeeper, who, as the host, does not go anywhere. There is someone called the host of this inn, the main manager of the place. Now, except for perhaps very rare occasions when he might need to go out for something, but fundamentally speaking, from morning until night, he is always managing this inn. His entire life is spent here. So this represents what? This represents our true nature. The true nature of the mind is like the host. It never goes anywhere. This is an analogy. Using this analogy, we can understand that our illusory mind is temporary. It is not permanent, not eternal, but our true mind, our true nature is always present, never changing. Therefore, the sutra continues. In the same way, if what makes distinctions when you hear me speak were truly your mind, then it would not go anywhere. What does this mean? It means if this discriminating mind of yours were truly your mind, then when the Buddha stops speaking, your mind should still be there. But in reality, when there is no sound, your discriminating mind also disappears. Therefore, this discriminating mind is not your true mind, the sutra continues. But could the nature of the mind be such that it makes distinctions about sound independently of sound? This is asking rhetorically, is it only the mind that discriminates sound, that depends on external conditions? No, it is not only that one. And the mind that makes distinctions about my voice also makes distinctions about my appearance. The mind that distinguishes the Buddha's appearance also depends on visible forms. When there are no visible forms, this distinguishing mind also cannot exist. Therefore, the sutra says, what makes distinctions about visible objects cannot do so independently of the visible objects it distinguishes. This means that all our discerning minds, whether they discriminate sounds, forms, or any other external objects, all depend on those external conditions. When those conditions are absent, these discerning minds also cannot exist. The sutra then mentions, and when the making of distinctions ceases such that neither space nor objects are distinguished, the state that Maskari, Goshaliputra, and the others wrongly call the truth of the unmanifested nature, even then your mind does not have a distinction-making nature that exists independent of objects of mind. Maskari Goshaliputra was a non-Buddhist teacher at that time. He and some other non-Buddhist teachers mistakenly believed that when the mind does not distinguish anything at all, when there is neither form nor emptiness, this state is the ultimate truth. They called this the unmanifested nature. However, the Buddha is saying here that even in that state, your mind still depends on certain mental objects or conditions. It is not truly independent. Therefore, the sutra concludes, thus, each of your mental states is dependent on something else. How could they be like the host of an inn? Each mental state depends on external conditions. When those conditions are present, the mind arises. When those conditions are absent, the mind ceases. How could such mental states be like the host who never leaves? They cannot be the true host. They are like the guest who stays temporarily and then departs. This is explaining to us that all our discerning minds are not our true mind. They are all temporary, conditional, and dependent on external circumstances. Our true mind, however, is like the host who never leaves. It is always present, unchanging, and not dependent on any conditions. This is a very important principle. Through this analogy, we can more clearly understand the difference between the illusory mind and the true mind. Next, Ananda asks a question. The sutra says, Ananda said, if each of my mental states is dependent on something else, then is the fundamental wondrously understanding mind of which the thus come one speaks also dependent on something else? I only hope that the Buddha will take pity on us and explain. Ananda is asking here, if each of my mental states depends on something else, then does the fundamental, wondrously understanding mind that you speak of also depend on something else? He wants to know whether the true mind, the fundamental mind, also has something it depends on, or whether it is truly independent. This is a very good question. Because if even the true mind depends on something else, then how is it different from the discerning mind? The Buddha will now answer this question and show us what it is that does not depend on anything. The sutra continues, the Buddha said to Ananda, as you see me now, the fundamental luminous essence of visual awareness is not the wondrous essential understanding mind. Nevertheless, it can be compared to a second moon rather than to a reflection of the moon. The Buddha is making a distinction here. He says that the fundamental essence of our visual awareness, although it is not yet the ultimate wondrous mind, is nevertheless quite close to it. He uses another analogy here. It is like a second moon. What does second moon mean? When someone has an eye disease, they might see two moons in the sky. One is the real moon, and the other is an illusory moon caused by the eye disease. This illusory moon is called the second moon. Although the second moon is not real, it is still a moon, not something else. It is quite similar to the real moon. This is different from a reflection of the moon in water, which is even further from the real moon. The Buddha is saying here that the fundamental essence of our visual awareness is like the second moon, not yet the ultimate true mind, but already quite close to it. It is not like the reflection in water, which is much further from the truth. This tells us that although we have not yet fully realized our true nature of mind, we can approach it step by step. The fundamental essence of seeing is already quite close to the true nature of mind. Then the Buddha says, listen attentively. I will now show you what does not depend on anything. The Buddha is telling Ananda to listen carefully because he is about to show him what does not depend on anything, what does not return to anything. This is the true mind. Unlike all the conditional, temporary mental states that arise and cease depending on conditions, the true mind never arises or ceases. It is always present. It does not depend on anything. It does not return to anything. This is what the Buddha is about to reveal to Ananda. This is a very crucial teaching in the Shurangama Sutra. Through this teaching, we can come to understand what our true nature of mind is. We can distinguish it from all the temporary conditional mental states that we normally identify as our mind. This is the beginning of understanding our true nature. All of the teachings directly discuss the mind. In this way, sometimes this mind refers to the illusory mind, and sometimes this mind refers to the true mind. Therefore, the difference between these two we must analyze through our own wisdom. Here it says that if this kind of mind of yours, the consciousness that grasps at form, sound, smell, taste, and touch, each has something to return to. These things we will discuss below. Each of them ultimately ceases and returns. Ultimately, they all must return and go back. If this is the case, then how could there be a host? How could it be the host? The host always remains permanently, does he not? He would not temporarily abide in a certain place and then depart from there. It is not like that. Now, what follows mainly discusses the 8 returns. The 8 returns are also very famous in the Shurangama Sutra. What is mainly taught in the Shurangama Sutra are the 10 methods of directly pointing to the nature of mind, and also the 8 returns, which many great masters particularly emphasize. Therefore, here, if our mind can cease and return, then it is not the host. Zixuan also says, the true mind is like the host. Deluded thoughts are like the guest. The true mind is like the host. The illusory mind is like the guest. Therefore, if this mind has cessation and change, then it is definitely not the host. This is the principle we discussed earlier. At this point, the Venerable Ananda says, if each of my mental states is dependent on something else, then is the fundamental, wondrously understanding mind of which the Thus Come One speaks also dependent on something else. I only hope that you will take pity on us and explain. Ananda's demeanor is still quite proper. He has a very respectful attitude toward the Buddha. Ananda, as an attendant, his demeanor, everyone should know. On one hand, he truly feels that compared to the Buddha's wisdom, the difference is very great. He cannot help but admire the Buddha's supreme wisdom. On the other hand, he is also extremely respectful toward the Buddha. Otherwise, he is the Buddha's cousin. Ananda is the Buddha's relative. Generally, relatives can be quite arrogant, but he is not like that. At this moment, Ananda further inquires, Ananda truly is. When he appears before the Buddha in this way, we should also be especially grateful. If he had not asked these questions at that time, although the Buddha possessed supreme subtle wisdom, he might not necessarily have taught it to sentient beings, and it might not have been set down in written form. Later he says, if this kind of mine, the illusory mind that was just mentioned, this mind nature here is not the true mind nature. If my illusory mind, each aspect of it, has something to return to, if each aspect must return and go back, then does not the Thus Come One speak of a fundamental, wondrously understanding mind? This luminous or true mind that we speak of, actually, in different contexts, the terms used are all different. Sometimes it is called the true mind, sometimes the luminous mind, and sometimes the fundamental, wondrously understanding mind, and so on. Does not the Buddha say there is an awareness, there is a fundamental mind? Does this not have any cessation or return? Why does it not return? You say that this is always permanently present. It is like the host. It is always there. Why is this the case? O compassionate Buddha, we sentient beings are very pitiful. You should regard us with your wisdom, have compassion on us sentient beings, and please teach us this. Here, Ananda is continuously requesting the turning of the Dharma wheel. The Buddha said to Ananda, as you see me now, the fundamental luminous essence of visual awareness is not the wondrous essential understanding mind. Nevertheless, it can be compared to a second moon rather than to a reflection of the moon. Here he gives an analogy. He says here, Ananda, do you not see me? This seeing with which you see me, actually, this seeing is called the fundamental luminous essence of visual awareness. This seeing is not particularly high. It is not the true ultimate mind, but it is also not particularly low. It is not the ordinary illusory mind of common worldly people either. Therefore, this understanding with which you now see me is called the fundamental luminous essence of visual awareness. Although this seeing is not the wondrous essential understanding mind, this kind of understanding is not the highest wondrous essential understanding mind. You see, just now it was the fundamental luminous essence of visual awareness, and here it is the wondrous essential understanding mind. So when the terms wondrous and essential are used quite frequently, we are all lost in fog and clouds. We do not know exactly what the Buddha is teaching, which is the highest and which is the lowest. However, his meaning is that the seeing with which you see me is considered, because from the analogy that follows, everyone will understand, to be at a middle level. It is also not the highest true mind. Now, the Buddha uses an analogy. The understanding with which you now see me is comparable to a second moon, not a reflection of the moon. Here, I may need to explain a bit. I think it might be better to introduce this according to what is explained in Beacon of Certainty and in Finding Rest in the Nature of Mind about the analogy of the water moon and the sky moon. That would also make for a better explanation. Sometimes it is used as an analogy for wisdom. Sometimes it is for actual wisdom. Understanding it in this way is also acceptable. What does this mean? It means that you, Ananda, see me. When you see me, everyone knows when you see his true mind. This is actually not the highest. It is a kind of understanding that is higher than that of ordinary worldly people, but it is not the true ultimate mind. If we use an analogy to explain this with the moon, there are 3 kinds of moons. According to this analogy, the first moon is the moon in the sky. It is the real moon. As for the second moon, when we use our fingers to press around our eyes and look at the moon in the sky, then in the middle of the moon in the sky, another moon will also appear. Actually, in Tibet, the second moon is generally quite well known among the common people. This is a household term. Therefore, when we were young, in the evening after we finished eating dinner, my younger brother and sister and I would sometimes go outside to look at the moon. How many moons do you see now? Ah, I see 2. Ah, I do not see them yet. This whole experience happened outside the tent, where there were usually many yaks. Then, among the yaks, we would look up at the sky. Especially at the time of the full moon on the 15th day, the moon would be perfectly round. Then we would keep looking at the sky. At that time, it was not about observing the mind. Everyone was simply curious. Why are there 2 moons? When I press like this, why does a moon immediately appear? Then, when I let go like this false moon here directly merges into the real moon. Everyone was very curious, always looking at the sky. Then we would count the stars. We used to do this. Then we would just keep counting. Oh, I cannot count them all. Actually, when we were young, there were many such things. Perhaps children in big cities nowadays do not necessarily have these kinds of experiences. During the day, the yaks would be out grazing. Then, in the evening, they would bring it back up again and start chewing it over. We ourselves would also eat tsampa. Sometimes, after swallowing it down, we would prepare to bring it back up again. But there was no way to do that. Then we would ask our parents, why is it that when we swallow the tsampa, we cannot bring it back up? So, regarding this second moon when we were very young, we would all look at it, but we did not really understand the meaning. Here today it is explained very clearly. There are 3 kinds of moons. One is the sky moon. One is when you press or squeeze your eyelid and 2 moons appear. And then there is another one, the reflection of the moon that appears on water vessels on the ground. 3 kinds of moons. Now, with these 3 kinds of moons, the way that the Venerable Ananda sees the Buddha's form, actually this nature of seeing that he perceives is actually quite similar to the second kind of moon that was just mentioned. As for the first kind of moon, it is the true mind, like attaining the first Bhumi Bodhisattva level, or truly seeing the real moon in the sky. It does not have any distinguishment whatsoever. Then the second kind of moon. Actually, when we taught the Great Perfection before, we also said that although we are ordinary worldly people, however, our teacher guides us to recognize the nature of mind. Although we have not fully attained realization, we can have a taste or glimpse of it. This is like the second moon. It is not the ultimate realization, but it is much closer to the true nature than the illusory mind. And then the third kind of moon is the water reflection. That represents the completely illusory mind of ordinary sentient beings. That is even further from the true nature. Therefore here, the Buddha is saying that Ananda's seeing is like the second moon. It is not the highest realization, but it is also not the lowest illusory mind. It is at an intermediate level. Through the practice of recognizing the nature of mind, we can gradually approach the ultimate true nature. This is a very important teaching. The Buddha is using this analogy to help us understand the different levels of realization and how we can progress on the path. Even though we may not have full realization yet, we can have an approximation of it, like the second moon that we can see when we press around our eyes. This helps us move in the right direction toward ultimate realization. Now, the Buddha continues, "Listen attentively. I will now show you what does not depend on anything." This is a very crucial turning point. The Buddha is about to reveal what does not return to anything, what does not depend on conditions. In other words, the true nature of mind. This is what Ananda has been asking about, and now the Buddha will explain it clearly. The sutra continues, "This great lecture hall, Ananda, opens to the east. Thus, when the sun rises, the hall is flooded with light." The Buddha is now going to use very concrete, observable phenomena to demonstrate his point. He starts by describing the lecture hall where they are all gathered. The hall opens to the east, so when the sun rises in the morning, light floods into the hall. This is something everyone can observe and verify for themselves. The Buddha will now use this and other observable phenomena to teach about what does not return, what is not dependent on conditions. The sutra continues, "But the hall is in darkness in the middle of the night if the moon has not risen or if cloud or fog obscures the sky." So there are different conditions that affect what we see. Sometimes there is bright sunlight, sometimes there is darkness at night, sometimes the moon provides light, and sometimes clouds or fog obscure our vision. All of these are changing conditions. The sutra continues, "Further, one can see out through cracks in the doors and shutters, but the walls and roof block the view." So the physical structure also affects what we can see. Where there are openings, we can see through. Where there are walls, our view is blocked. The sutra continues, "Where the various objects are distinguished, we can perceive how they are related to one another, but where there are no objects, space is all that one sees. When there are objects present, we can distinguish them and see their relationships, but when there are no objects, we just see empty space." The sutra continues, "Where mists or clouds of dust are present, objects are obscured or distorted. Once the mist has dispersed, or once the dust has settled so that the air is pure again, one can again see everything clearly." The Buddha is systematically describing all the various conditions that affect what we perceive: light and darkness, openings and obstructions, objects and empty space, clarity and obscurity. All of these are changing phenomena. They come and go depending on various conditions. Now the Buddha is going to show that while all these phenomena change, there is something that does not change, something that does not depend on these conditions. This is the crucial teaching. The Buddha says, "Ananda, you have all observed how aspects of these phenomena will change. Now I will show you how the presence of each of them depends on the condition necessary to it." This is the beginning of the famous teaching on the 8 returns. The Buddha is going to show that each of these changing phenomena returns to its cause, that each depends on a specific condition. When that condition is present, the phenomenon appears. When that condition is absent, the phenomenon disappears. But the seeing awareness itself does not come and go with these conditions. It does not return to anything. It is always always present. This is the profound teaching that the Buddha is about to reveal. The sutra continues. What are the conditions necessary to these changing phenomena, Ananda? The sun is a necessary condition for sunlight, since there can be no sunlight without the sun. Therefore, the sunlight is dependent upon the sun, which is a necessary condition for its presence. This is the first of the 8 returns. Light returns to the sun. The brightness we see in the hall is dependent upon the sun. When the sun is present, there is light. When the sun sets, the light goes away. So the light returns to the sun. It is dependent upon the sun as its cause. The sutra continues. The moon's absence is a necessary condition for the darkness in the hall. This is the second return. Darkness returns to the absence of the moon. When the moon is not shining at night, the hall becomes dark. So darkness is dependent upon the absence of the moon. The sutra continues. Openings in the doors and shutters are necessary conditions for your being able to see out. This is the third return. The ability to see through returns to the openings. When there are openings in the doors and windows, we can see through them. So this ability is dependent upon the presence of openings. The sutra continues. The walls and roof are necessary conditions for the view being blocked. This is the fourth return. Obstruction returns to the walls. When there are solid walls and a roof, our view is blocked. So this obstruction is dependent upon the walls and roof. I will now continue with the remaining returns in the next section of our teaching. This teaching on the 8 returns is one of the most profound sections of the Shurangama Sutra. Through this teaching, we come to understand what does not depend on conditions. If we discriminate and distinguish the various external forms, sounds, smells, tastes, and tactile objects, these 5 dusts, 6 dusts, these are the conditions that you see. This can also be called the aspect of having objects, or it should be called the aspect of conditions. But where there are no objects, space is all that one sees. This empty space, one shoe, means empty space. Within empty space, there is nothing everywhere. This is called emptiness. This is called the aspect of emptiness. Earlier, it was the aspect of conditions. This is the aspect of emptiness. And then, where mists or clouds of dust are present, objects are obscured or distorted. Generally in the world, for example, there are vapors from the earth, dust from the soil, and ash dust. In such situations, there will be a kind of obscurity, or we can say a kind of dimness. This is generally called the turbid aspect. Dust and ash also pervade everywhere. For example, sometimes there are mirages, sometimes there is dust, especially when a strong wind arises. The dust from the ground or the shadows and light are all swept up and one cannot see anything at all, especially in places where there is war and conflict right now. Everywhere there is a pervasive aspect like this. This is called the turbid aspect. Once the mist has dispersed, or once the dust has settled so that the air is pure again, one can again see everything clearly. For example, after the rain has fallen, the sky has already cleared and it is exceptionally bright. If we look at this, this is called clarity, or the pure aspect. Therefore, we have light and darkness, openness and obstruction, and also having objects and emptiness, and also turbidity and purity. Altogether, there are 8 kinds of distinguishing aspects, the 8 returns distinguishing aspects. This is also called the 8 returns distinguishing seeing. These are opposing dharmas. In what we see and hear, actually indeed, as taught in the Shurangama Sutra, there are these 8 kinds of opposing dharmas. Of course, there are many, many more, but the Buddha here only gave these examples. These aspects actually all cease and return. Actually, this is introducing the conventional worldly phenomena, the dualistic dharmas that people are constantly attached to. Actually, each of them dissolves into its own essence. He wants to point out this principle to us. Then the Buddha says, Ananda, you have all observed how aspects of these phenomena will change. Now I will show you how the presence of each of them depends on a condition necessary to it. The Buddha says, you see, right now there are these 8 different kinds of changing aspects, and especially many of them are opposite to each other, mutually exclusive. Today I will take all of these and return each of them to its own cause. What are the conditions necessary? How will I make each of them return and cease into its own original essence? He tells Ananda, Among these changing phenomena, the sunlight returns to the sun. Why is this so? There can be no sunlight without the sun. Therefore, the sunlight is dependent upon the sun, which is a necessary condition for its presence. Therefore, it returns to the sun. He says, earlier, did I not speak about light and darkness? As for light, let it return to the sun. Among these changes, I can make each of them. It is like sometimes when we play video games, many armies appear, and then they all finally merge into one. When observing the generation stage, it is also like this. First, visualize Manjushra Bodhisattva. After a while, Manjushra Bodhisattva becomes a luminous dot, or becomes a syllable, DHI. After a while, it dissolves into the empty space. Actually, this is also a kind of play. In the worldly realm, it is actually also like this. He makes this light return to the sun. Earlier, was it not the aspect of light? Why is this so? Because without the sun, there can be no light. Therefore, light can completely belong to the sun. Therefore, this is called returning to the sun. Light enters into the sun. Then, as for darkness, it returns to the absence of the moon. Because darkness dissolves into darkness, actually, light dissolves into light, and darkness dissolves into darkness. Openness returns to the doors and windows. Obstruction returns to the walls and roof. The external dust as conditions return to the act of distinguishment, to the discerning mind that was mentioned earlier. Emptiness returns to empty space. Turbidity returns to particles of dust. Clarity returns to the clearing of the sky or to purity. Therefore, all of these phenomena that are opposing in the worldly realm, all of them return to their own essence. In the Mahaprajna Paramita Sutra, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Form does not differ from emptiness. Emptiness does not differ from form. Actually, light and darkness, or openness and obstruction and so forth, all of these dharmas, if they merge into their own essence, there is not a true reality to them. These aspects of theirs are designated by our habitual discerning thoughts, and every act of seeing the changing phenomena of this world belongs to one of these types. Therefore, all dharmas, all things and phenomena in the worldly realm, all things and phenomena actually do not go beyond these categories. The 8 kinds of cessation and return mentioned earlier can basically be said to encompass everything. When causes and conditions come together, we see various things. Without causes, we do not see them. It seems that when causes and conditions come together, this should be taught in the Bodhicaryavatara. When causes and conditions come together, we see all phenomena. But without causes, they will not be seen. Light is also like this. As for light, when the causes and conditions are complete, there is light. But this light, actually, these causes and conditions are also merely designated. In A Guide to Words of My Perfect Teacher, there is a special introduction to all dharmas arise from causes and conditions. This principle is explained in great detail. Why do we say that all dharmas arise from causes and conditions? All dharmas arise from causes and conditions. All dharmas cease from causes and conditions. Why is this principle so? It is explained very clearly. Therefore, in Mula Madhyamaka Shastra, it is also said, in Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way, it is also that among all dharmas, there is not a single dharma that is not based on causes and conditions. Among all dharmas, there is not a single dharma that is not emptiness. The reason for saying this is also like this. Consider these 8 types. What would you say is the necessary condition for the presence of the understanding nature that is the essence of your visual awareness? Here, as for the external dharmas, indeed, they cease and return in this way. However, you have seen these 8 types. Venerable Ananda, these 8 types that you have seen, the understanding nature that is the essence of your visual awareness, this seer of yours, the understanding nature that is the essence of your visual awareness, what does it depend on? This essence of seeing that sees these things, the subjective perceiver, this luminous nature that can see, what does it return to? Below, he also examines one's own mind to see whether it has a true essential nature or not. When examining this, the sutra says, why is this so? If the presence of light is a necessary condition for your visual awareness, then when light is absent so that it is completely dark, if you say that this seeing also must return, because seeing is, after all, a luminous nature, if this kind of luminous nature returns to light, then when there is no light, we mentioned earlier, for example, blind people, when there is no light, you would not be able to see the darkness, which in fact you do see. Then even the subjective perceiver of darkness would not exist. There is this fallacy. Therefore, our true seeing also does not have a true cessation and return. Your mind makes distinctions about light and darkness and the other phenomena, but the essence of your visual awareness does not make these distinctions. Although we have light and darkness, the differences in external objects, the consciousness that can see also has seeing of darkness and seeing of light. However, these various differences at the level of our true seeing have no differences whatsoever. It must be like this, because the nature of seeing has no differences. Seeing the 8 kinds of external objects definitely has differences. Clearly then, the mind that experiences these conditioned phenomena is not what is fundamentally you. If there is cessation and return, then naturally it is not your luminous nature. But what is not these conditioned phenomena must be what is fundamentally you. If it is not you, what else could it be? If it is not what returns to you, then if it is not yours, whose is it? The meaning is that if there exists a luminous thing that does not have cessation and return, then this is yours. This is precisely your original face, as taught in the Platform Sutra of the 6th Patriarch. If this is not your original face, then whose original face is it? This is truly. Therefore, sometimes when we look at our own mind to see whether we have attained enlightenment or not, on one hand, we can ask other Dharma friends or teachers to verify for us. This is also acceptable. But sometimes when we ourselves look at these scriptures or when we see these teachings, we basically all know it. If this kind of recognition of yours arises and ceases with conditions, sometimes arising, sometimes unclear, you yourself feel that when you are in the assembly hall, it seems as if you have truly attained enlightenment. But after a while, when you go downstairs and encounter someone with whom you do not have a good relationship and it has completely vanished, then is this your natural primordial wisdom? There may be some difficulty with this if it does not have cessation and return, and this kind of recognition always remains in this state. The omniscient Longchenpa in the Treasury of the Dharmadhatu explains that when you are externally distracted, within that distracted distinguishing thought, if you recognize the luminous, clear, naked essence of awareness, then in that case, at all times, in any situation, after recognizing this kind of awareness, it will always accompany you. In this kind of situation, you may not follow our conventional mental state of arising and ceasing with conditions or experiencing gain and loss. It may not be like that. Therefore, ultimately, truly, this mind, it is very important that everyone use various methods to recognize it. If we do not recognize this mind, whether we rely on studying conventional scriptures and treatises or rely on conventional virtuous practices to tame the mind, temporarily speaking, using a method of suppression is still acceptable. However, once the causes and conditions are complete, if your root has not been pulled out, it will definitely blossom and bear fruit. Therefore, now, as practitioners, we should truly use all our strength on cutting off the ego clinging. From the Madhyamaka perspective, all our strength, just as taught in the 7 points of mind training, all our strength should be used on cutting off ego clinging. If from the Vajrayana and meditation perspective, all our strength should be used on recognizing our own mind. Actually, the Masters often taught in the past about this mind of ours. If we speak about it in more complex terms, it is indeed very difficult. So many sentient beings have not recognized their own minds. But if we speak about it in simpler terms, it is just one's own mind. One's own mind. We also do not need to ask others about it. If you look inward slightly, it is not as if, oh, can you see things in billions of worlds beyond? It is not like that. Each and every one of us has this mind. If we have this mind, then what exactly is this mind of mine like? At this time, what manifests may be an illusory mind on the level of appearances. Then, what is the essence of this illusory mind like? If you examine it, you will realize, oh, although right now I am often attached to the state of an illusory mind, or under the dictates of the illusory mind, I am like a slave. However, if we truly recognize its nature, then actually the illusory mind is the true mind. It's the true. We may truly recognize a kind of mind nature. At this time, in our own mind stream, the so-called hatred like raging fire, craving like boiling water, and ignorance like darkness, all of these can be completely destroyed. As I also said yesterday, I increasingly feel that if many sentient beings in this world truly recognize their own minds, then these 3 poisons, 5 poisons of ignorance and afflictions, these poisons we will definitely stay away from. These are truly poisons. Just look at the whole world now. Look at those people in countries at war. If it were not poison, with one moment of hatred, they begin to kill so many people. And then, with one moment of craving, they want to possess this, they want to possess that. Under the drive of craving, we humans can indeed seize control of many people, external wealth and territories. Therefore, throughout history, so many of humanity's various kinds of wars and unrest. Many of them are caused by these 2 minds, craving and hatred, churning. Once they churn, they are very difficult to stop. In this way, some people among us are extremely capable. If they are capable, then relying on this kind of power, they also bring immense suffering to sentient beings. Among us humans, if there are positive ones, for example, those with compassion and bodhicitta, people with extremely powerful bodhicitta, then perhaps in this world, the mind streams of countless people will also be transformed. I myself think this way. I do not know if you have this feeling. You should also think about it. Buddhism is a theoretical teaching. However, every one of the principles in the theory, including some very simple ones, whether it is craving, hatred and ignorance, or bodhicitta, these truths are vividly manifesting in the world, displaying their power. Negative emotions, what kind of harm do they bring to sentient beings? Positive emotions, what kind of power and courage do they bring to sentient beings? Therefore, regarding these issues, I think as practitioners, if we frequently observe these things, some of the principles the Buddha taught, we do not need to tell others, what we are saying is absolutely true and certain, extremely wonderful. We do not need to say it like that. If a person with wisdom truly examines these things in the wish-fulfilling treasury later on, it also discusses all the various different sectarian views in the world. When we analyze these views, we will know why we have encountered such views. Therefore, we should on one hand consider ourselves quite fortunate. Everyone should think about it this way. If it does not have cessation and return, then this is your true original face. Know then that your mind is fundamentally wondrous, luminous, and pure. Know that this kind of mind of yours, this originally luminously pure mind, this is the true mind. What we are teaching about is awareness, the thoroughly clear mind. Actually, this explanation method can be completely integrated with that of the Great Perfection. If you recognize this kind of mind, this is the original, marvelous, luminous, and pure mind. Luminous, free from conceptual elaboration, unconditioned Dharma. To whom can it be explained? Not knowing this, and so forth. This is what the Buddha originally recognized at the beginning, the original, marvelous, luminous, and pure mind. However, many of us sentient beings are not like this. You have confused yourself and have lost track of what is fundamental. Because you have not recognized it, you yourself, through your own deluded appearances, have lost your own originally present nature. Then, bound in the 3 realms of samsara, in this kind of birth and death, you are constantly drifting. Therefore, as for sentient beings regarding light and darkness, we can also say that On one hand, it is as easy as turning over one's palm. It's very easy. However, on the other hand, in the end, they departed from the essence and drifted in samsara. Therefore, the thus come one, the Buddha, with great compassion, said, "You pitiful beings, you pitiful sentient beings. Originally, we ourselves possess such Buddha nature, but sentient beings all do not know it." Now, this principle, the Buddha to all of us sentient beings, refers to us as pitiful sentient beings. The reason for saying this is also like this. So up to this point, among the 10 aspects of revealing the nature of seeing, we have completed the 5th one. In the next class, we will teach the 6th one, revealing that the nature of seeing is not a material object. We will explain this principle. That is all for today's teaching.
Kirgana jirano chupai chupun solen droa droa
Bandharangara Badma Sadargye Bandharangara Badma Sadargye Bandharangara Badma Sadargye